Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Schatz.
Thank you, Rabbi Shapiro. We're going to be talking about Parashat Pinchas.
Are we?
Yeah. And we know that we have chosen the correct verses, both of us, today. Though last week was definitely fun to be a little bit on my toes.
We're doing chapter 28, verses 1 through 3.
Oh, mm-hmm. So I'm going to kick it off to Rabbi Shapiro to take us through the Parsha a bit, and then we'll get into our actual verses that we both prepared for this morning. All right.
What if I just presented different verses? What would you do? Would you just tell me I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Okay. Parshat Pinchas it is. What if I prepped the wrong Parsha? Nope.
That would never happen.
That would not, well, I said to Rabbi Schatz, since I was off for a couple of weeks, it's helpful to have this class to remind me what Parsha it is. It's very helpful. Okay. We are picking up in chapter 27, but we're not, I'll dance through it quickly. Most of the first part of chapter 27 has little, if anything, to do with the verses we'll be focusing in on, only insofar as it's the narrative right beforehand, which is the narrative of Benot Tzlofchad, which you might not have been familiar with before this week, but if you've probably heard cited any number of places around the Temple Beth Am system already over the past couple of days. Benot Tzlofchad, who seem to be left propertyless after their father passes away, and there is not yet legal remedy for them to inherit their father's property, at which point they come forward saying, hey, this is not groovy. Moshe brings it to God. God agrees that it is not groovy and says that, yes, they should be able to inherit property. I think that pretty much gets us through that. Rabbi Schatz, do you see groovy in the psukim anywhere, or did I make that up?
The word groovy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think it's that.
Okay, but general gist. Yeah. And then we move into narrative about succession, right? We know from a couple of weeks ago that Moshe is not going to enter the land with the people because he whacked the rock. And so now we move into more of kind of the practical pieces for what that means and looks like regarding the actual passing on of leadership. And we're going to be honing in on a piece of that narrative this fine Friday morning. God says to Moses, go up to the heights of Abarim. Rabbi Schatz, I haven't seen In the Heights yet. I still need to see In the Heights, is what this is reminding me of. And see the land that I have given Karen liked it. And see the land that I have given the Israelite people. And when you've seen it, you shall be gathered to your king. You're going to die just as Aaron did. And he gives the reason here, because you disobeyed me, right? You disobeyed me through this incident with the water. At one point, a very long time ago, Rabbi Schatz and I were considering exploring these verses in terms of what this means. I was particularly interested in this idea of like the reasoning. I'm always interested in sort of why this happens the way it does. And this phrase caught my eye as well, lehakdisheni b'mayim le'eineihem, that like they were supposed to be sanctified through water in their eyes. That just struck me as an interesting turn of phrase. So in a parallel dimension, Rabbi Schatz and I are exploring that in greater depth, but that is not the dimension we are currently in as far as I can tell. God says back to Moses, Moses says to God, God let the source of the breath of all flesh appoint someone over the community, right? If I'm going, somebody needs to take over. Who shall go out before them, come in before them, who shall take them out and bring them in, so that God's community, and really evocative imagery here, so that God's community may not be like sheep that have no shepherd, hearkening back to his pre-leadership life. And so here is where we are going to pick things up. We are going to ambitiously stake out not 3 verses, but 4 verses, because we are just that crazy about Torah. Right, Rabbi Schatz? So we are going to be looking at chapter 27, verses 18 through 21. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, God said to Moses, Kach lecha et Yeshua bin Nun. Take for yourself, the translation here is terrible, it says single out. Nope. Take for yourself Yeshua bin Nun, Ish asher ruach bo. The translation here says an inspired man, which I would also say, nope. A man that has ruach within him, and I'm going to intentionally leave ruach untranslated because I looked at that a good bit. If that's okay with you, Rabbi Schatz.
Yep.
Great. V'samachta et yadcha alav, and you should place your hands upon him. Although there's some conversation about whether yadcha or yadecha, whether that should be singular or plural. Talk about that. V'hamata oto lifnei Elazar Kohen. You should have him stand up before Elazar Kohen, who's now the high priest of lifnei kol ha'edah, and before all the people. V'tzivitach oto le'enehem. And you should, you see the word tziva, like command him, but you should sort of, I guess we can go with commission. You should commandify him in front of their eyes. V'natata mehodecha alav. And you should, man, I don't like this translation at all, Rabbi Schatz. These verses are not well translated at all.
Sorry. I don't know what to tell you.
It says, invest him with some of your authority, I guess, and you should give from your hod. I'm going to leave that untranslated for a moment as well. Give from your hod. Splendor, glory. Rabbi Schatz, you can talk about Kabbalah. It's very exciting. You should give some of your glory to him. L'ma'an yishma'u kol adat b'nei Israel. So that all the Israeli people should listen to him. Verse 21, V'lifnei Elazar Kohen ya'amod. And you should stand up before the high priest, Elazar Kohen. V'sha'al lo b'mishpat ha'urim lifnei Adonai. I found this phrase to be very interesting, and I actually didn't find much on it, somewhat disappointingly. Maybe Rabbi Schatz did. And he shall ask for him about the decision of the Urim before God, right? Those of you who remember various amulets in ancient Near East history, that we had the Urim and Tumim, right? The sort of high priest's breastplate that also was sort of a proto Ouija board that would be consulted for sort of some decisions that would be made for all the people. Rabbi Schatz really liked that metaphor. Al piv yetzu al piv yavou. According to his mouth they shall go out, and according to his mouth they shall come in. Hu v'chol b'nei Yisrael ito v'chol ha'edah. And again, the grammar here is kind of weird, I would say. Him and all of b'nei Yisrael with him, and all the people, right? Which is just sort of an oddly constructed last phrase to close things out. But this is God telling Moses about how it will happen that authority and leadership will be transferred over to Yehoshua, which is why we stuck with the 4-verse chunk. Rabbi Schatz.
Yes, Rabbi Shapiro.
Over to you.
Okay. Any kushiot? Any questions? There are lots of kind of metaphorical phrases here. So any questions about either meaning or what's going on or why does it have to happen this way? Anything like that? For those listening on the podcast, we have a smaller group today, so we might not have as many kushiot, which is totally fine. Rabbi Shapiro and I will be happy.
I'm chock full of kushiot. Can we get T-shirts that say that?
No.
Why Eliezer? Why did he?
Well, go ahead. You muted yourself, Renee, mid-sentence.
Why was Eliezer appointed the spokesperson for him?
Okay, great. So what was so special about him, or why him? What was his role? Great. Fantastic. Denise.
Okay, so the thing about Hodecha.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got this calendar for Sfirat HaOmer.
Mm-hmm.
It was very groovy, Rabbi Shapiro. So it had like all these illustrations, and then each week had a different theme, and then they all combined like on the multiplication table. Yeah. So Hod had like a bunch of translations, and so one of them was splendor and stuff, but then it was also connected to thankfulness.
Yeah.
Like Todah, and then it was also connected to humility. I forgot how, but there was all this stuff about humility. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing, that first that they picked something multifaceted to invest him with, and then just like having those things connected to each other is kind of nice.
Yeah,
I think it's nice that like for a leader that there would be splendor, but also gratitude and humility at the same time.
Yeah, great. So you're bringing up a really interesting point that they could have used just one very specific adjective, right? I'll stick with adjective, to be able to explain what kind of leader they would want. But what you're bringing up for us, Denise, is that this is a word not only that it is hard for us to maybe define based on the different meanings that we know, but also just has different aspects to it in general. That if you're using it in one way, it might mean one thing. And if you're using it another way, it might mean another thing. And so too with leadership, that if you are leading a funeral, it's very different than leading a wedding, very different than giving a sermon, right? There's different kinds of leadership that bring with it different attributes of that leader. So that's a really beautiful way of wondering around that particular word and why it was used as opposed to something maybe a little bit more specific.
The only thing I'll add to that is, it's
nice new name.
Thanks.
I think chalk, is that how chalk is spelled in that phrase?
Yeah, how else would it be written?
Okay, all right.
Chok full of kushiot.
Yeah, okay.
Denise, I would just sort of like reverse the linguistic flow, right? That there's this word hod that appears first in the Torah and that over time gets imbued and invested with like different layers of meaning, right? So it might hold a certain phrase here, and actually, at least from what I saw, it's held up as like a source text for like a couple of different ways in which the concept evolves over time in the tradition, right? Like I don't know what hod originally meant in 1200 BCE. And over time, because rabbinic Judaism does what it does and has layers and layers of meaning to things over time, I think it acquired some of those different pieces, and recognizing that, yes, like Hod and Todah and Hodaya and all of that stuff, right? That's clearly in there, and probably also had that splendor idea. And just that those layers get invested over time. And to add, yes, it's also one of the Sfirot, right? So that's part of why it showed up in your, or core reason why it showed up in your groovy Sfirat HaOmer book.
Renee.
I knew you'd find a way, Rabbi Shapiro, to tie this into Srugim with Hodaya. Okay. So my question is, why did they need to have specific instructions of how to go in and how to come out? Was it based on like tribes? Was it based on like first the important people led the line and then the less important people?
Yeah, it's a great, there's a lot of choreography in the Torah in general, specifically around leadership and around the temple, interestingly. So it's a great question. Why this specific choreography for this specific moment for these specific people, and what went into deciding on that choreography? Great question.
And the answer is?
I don't know.
Well, we're doing kushiot, not shuvot.
Got it. Thanks.
Any others? I'm Marlies. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Sorry if this was addressed already. The Urim, what is that?
Yeah, Rabbi Shapiro, I'll let him explain. I think he mentioned it earlier, but I'll let him explain.
So,
great metaphor.
Ooh, yeah. Wait, maybe, hold on a sec. Can I try to find a picture? Sure.
Sure.
Because I know some of us are visual learners. Schatz?
Very good.
So it looked a little something. There's some very weird depictions of this on the internet, but I guess no one should really be surprised by that because it is, after all, the internet. So it was related to, it was part of the garb of the high priest, right? So something like this, that there were 12 stones of different colors that would sort of be like indicated in some way about how things should happen. And we don't know a lot about that process. Interestingly, to break from the Kushiyot part of the program just briefly, a lot of, in terms of the question about like going in and going out, much of what I saw on that was that it was actually related to like wartime, that it wasn't related to this specific ritual, that like that's the process through which decisions will be made about how to like fight the enemy, that it wasn't specifically located here, which does not seem to make sense within the context of the verse at all, right? Like why all of a sudden are we talking about that? But part of the ritual for how decisions were made among the people was by consulting this, to which I'll add a kushiyah that I'm sure Rabbi Schatz has an answer for that I didn't find anything on, which is they're almost always described as the Urim v'Tumim, right? That it's a package deal. It's like, Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy or other, comedy teams.
Rabbi Schatz and Rabbi Shapiro.
Mm-hmm. Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy, Schatz and Shapiro. That would be a t-shirt. That generally are, I'm going to sound weird now, that are generally considered to be inseparable. And so to just see one or the other is a little unusual, but I also didn't find much on why that is. But Rabbi Schatz probably did.
No, I actually didn't focus much on that verse at all. I mean, I found it interesting, but I wasn't as interested in that as the other three. So.
All right. So maybe somebody on podcast land has something.
Maybe.
Podcast.
What?
Podcast town.
What?
Podcastopolis.
Podcast what? You're just very far away from your computer now. So
I said podcast town, podcastville, podcast land, podcastopolis.
Great. I'm glad you repeated that for all of us.
You wanted to know. I was ready to let it go.
Okay.
I want to mute myself.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so one of the things, I'm going to share my screen so I can look at it and you at the same time. One of the things that I was very interested in here was the word lecha here in the first verse. So it says, Vayomar Adonai Moshe kach lecha et Yehoshua. Like, what does it mean to take Yehoshua for yourself? One of the things that Rabbi Shapiro and I spoke about in terms of choosing these verses was that the idea of leadership is quite interesting here, right? That we know that Moshe is not going to make it into the land, and so someone has to come after him. It's just like when someone decides they're leaving a position, the person who comes in afterwards, they know that that person was there before them, and they kind of download all of the things that that person did so that they can then make their own decisions. It's happened, I'm sure, to many of us in terms of transition and how we transition into something or out of something. So why does it say kach lecha, take for yourself, right? It's not really for Moshe. You're not taking, when I took the position, I wasn't taking the position for Rabbi Ari Lucas. I was taking the position for me. I know you were there. I know. Rabbi Shapiro was the interim associate rabbi.
What am I? Chopped liver?
Not chopped liver. But in terms of like,
I'm being erased. This is erasure. This is Shapiro erasure.
Okay, I wasn't taking the position for Rabbi Shapiro. I was taking the position for myself. So why would it say for Moshe, kach lecha, take him for yourself, take Yehoshua for yourself? So what I found here is Rashi says that to take for yourself is to take one who has been examined by you, to take one who you're familiar with. So the lecha is not so much that you're taking the person for yourself, but rather that you yourself have decided who is going to take that position following you. So it's actually a poor example to use my own position, because Rabbi Shapiro nor Rabbi Lucas hired me. But when it comes to succession, it is important for the person who is leaving to know who is coming into their spot, so that you know what they're capable of, so that you hope that they can continue on with certain things that you started. So what Rashi's saying is that lecha was not to say for Moshe, but rather that Moshe was able to see what in Yehoshua was available that would continue on this legacy, this leadership that he had put out into the world. Any thoughts on that? Or Rabbi Shapiro, do you have anything to say on that?
It's interesting because it seems to, I like it, and it seems to very much run counter to a lot of what seems to be communicated, like that Moses says, please pick someone, and God says, here's the one who you should pick.
Right.
But this is almost completely inverting that, right? Which, it makes it feel like a more collaborative conversation about who should be next, which is very interesting because the pshat of the text definitely does not seem to indicate that.
Right. Well, that's why I think the phraseology of kach lecha is so interesting, because it really isn't for yourself, right, in any way that we're seeing it in the Torah. And if you're to read Rashi into that, all the more so, it doesn't really make as much sense as you're saying. Yeah, Denise.
So could it mean like take him for yourself, like take him under your wing kind of and be a mentor to him?
Yeah, I think that's what I expected it to mean. But I think that what the Torah seems to be saying is that this is just going to be a guy who does the leadership the way that Moshe does leadership, right? And so I believe that what Rashi is getting at is exactly what you're saying, Denise, that it's not so much that the person is going to be there when you no longer are able to lead, but rather that this needs to be a person who can download from you all the things that you were able to do to lead this people so that they too can have that success moving forward. Rabbi Shapiro, I don't have anything else on that particular word, though I do have a lot on the smicha piece. So I don't know where your stuff fits in, but I don't want to go too out of order.
Well, you'll be shocked to hear that I was very interested in the Hod piece. So I explored that a bit. Okay. I was also very interested in the Asher Ruach Bo phrase, which slots in pretty much right in between Kachacha and the Smicha. So I can speak to that.
Yeah, I have one thing on that, but I'll let you go first, and you probably have the same thing. So you do you, and then I'll go after.
Did you say you do you? Is that what we're doing?
I did.
I'm not doing me. I'm doing rabbis. It's not about me. I'm just a vessel for.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. I found 3.5 different understandings of what ruach might mean. I'm sure there are more, but just this phrase that seems to be the primary qualifier for what makes Yehoshua a fit to take over next. There's a lot of ways of understanding what that might mean. And a lot of them seem to be not at all, again, like what the pshat would suggest, right? Because ish asher ruach bo, I think would most simply be translated as a man who has spirit in him, right? That the sense of like going all the way back to the very beginning, Ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei, right? This sense of Ruach being connected to. Growing up, I learned I can still chant the first few verses of the Torah. Those are pro. Reshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz v'haaretz haytatahu lavahu choshech al pnei tehom veruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim.
I will sign you up for Simchat Torah.
Vayomer Elohim yihi or vayhi or.
Right.
So very closely connected to spirit, to God. So it, like, on its face, it already makes sense, right? Big Mo, best of all time. He's the GOAT. He's the greatest. So who do you want to have take over? Somebody else who has that same, an approximation, some close version of having that ruach, of having that connection. Okay. And there's a lot of different readings of it that do not seem to see it that simply. So Sforno is the one who I found who was closest to that. Sforno said someone who is ready and worthy to be presented to Melech Malchei HaMelechim, to the King of Kings, right? Which seems to be close-ish to a pshat read, right? What does it mean that he is Ruach Bo? He's ready. He's worthy. He has like divinity in him in such a way that he's already close to God. So that was that. Ha'emek Davar made the comment. He said, yes, a man in whom there is spirit, but he had like an interesting sort of addendum to that. He said that he is independent in his views, and he is not drawn after urges for his own pleasure or that of others. Which, again, does not seem to be the pshat, right? Or at least it's an explication of having ruach that is not what immediately felt intuitive to me, right? He's independent. He sees things his own way. And he has impulse control, which sounds like a fascinating experience to have in this life. But he has the ability to act He has the ability to actually to press pause, and that's part of what qualifies him as a leader. So he has spirit, but what that means is independence and self-control, which is interesting. Like that's an interesting 1-2 punch in terms of qualifying him for leadership.
Can I insert mine here for 1 second, because I think it's connected to that?
Of course you can.
Okay.
Look at that self-control. Look at that.
Good job.
Qualified for leadership.
Okay.
Really independent in my views.
All right, my turn. So Rashi says that, and actually it's from a midrash, but it says that
was going to be my next one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Of course. How could I leave Rashi out? Can I do my half, because I have a half, and then I'll leave Rashi to you, Rabbi Schatz. But I was going to close with Rashi.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
Okay. I appreciate your self-control and your independence of views. You're so qualified to be a leader. Rabbeinu Bachya sort of similarly reading like independence into this, I think. He quotes Sifrei actually, but he says this means he has the emotional fortitude to brave all opposition, right? Which is like related to independence and related to self-control, but seems to be a little bit different. That like he's going to be a leader sometimes, right? When you're a leader, people don't always agree with you. I have never experienced, but maybe Rabbi Schatz has, that part of being a leader means being able to sort of take the fact that people are going to disagree with you, and that's what this idea of ruach is. So again, like lots of different readings of this, which, you know, as is often the case, like if you bundle all of them up, seems to make it a very rich, evocative phrase. And what does it mean? Like, yes, right? I think it's possible to see it in all of those ways, including the way Rashi reads it. Rabbi Schatz, over to you.
So I think that that the Rashi piece goes back to, who was it? Ha'emek Davar, right before the last one you just did?
Yeah.
Because Rashi says, I'll read it, it's someone who is able to deal with the character of each one, meaning each person. And I think that there's something really beautiful about being able to say that you have this spirit in you, but the spirit that you have in you actually makes you more aware, more conscious, and more connected to each and every person based on their attributes. So it takes it away from the person themselves, and kind of when we think of ruach, we might think of like a spirited person, and actually makes it someone who is just more intuitive or more perceptive or more empathetic, you know, whatever it is, to the people who are around you. Were you going to say something different about that, Rashi?
I was just thinking, it took every ounce of self-control I had to not break out into we've got Ruach. Yes, we do. We've got Ruach. How about you? But no, I was able to share that, so I feel better. Yes, you.
Yeah, I thought it. I just didn't do it.
Why, you're a better leader than I am. Yeah, it is interesting how it's inverted, that it's not about something, well, it is something that is in him, but something in him that makes it possible for him to
Exactly.
And I would say I love that reading, right? He takes it from Sifrei, like it's in the Midrash, and of all of the reads, to me, it is the least intuitive one. Right?
Yeah,
Ruach,
for sure.
Ruach Bo, seems to be speaking to something in him, spirit, individuality, ability to withstand opposition. He has Ruach, he has something in him that qualifies him for leadership.
Yeah.
And this, right, if Rashi's quoting it, it's taking hold as a core rabbinic understanding for what this phrase is. And to say that it's someone who can deal with each person as an individual. Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's something I aspire to. I think that's really important. It's an amazing thing when you encounter a leader who's able to connect on an individual level with each person who's sort of in their charge. That's incredible and exceedingly rare. And also, I don't think it's what Asher Ruach Bo means. I don't think that's what that phrase most readily sees.
Well, could it mean, this is a very poetic reading of it, but could it mean that in being able to feel for other people or understand that which they have within them, it creates a different kind of spirit in you? If I spend enough time, we'll just go off of our Abbott and Costello, relationship here. If I spend enough time with you and I take on certain aspects of your personality, that has now changed my personality. That's changed my ruach, right? That's made me, because I am aware of that which makes you up, right? That you then create your own ruach. And so maybe it's actually a little bit more fluid than the other rabbis are seeing it to be, that Asher Ruach Bo means that he has within him also the aspects of all the other people who have influenced him. And that's what makes a good leader, because he's no longer just himself. He's also made up of all the different aspects of the people around him.
I think that's lovely.
And you don't agree?
I have a hard time, and I might be missing a grammar piece or a linguistic association. When I read the phrase Asher Ruach Bo, the concept of Ruach seems to beg interpretation, right? What does that mean? It also pretty clearly to me seems to be a type of leadership trait within Yehoshua, rather than the ability to recognize the individuality of each individual person, right? So.
Yeah, okay.
But it's a lovely concept. And something to aspire to. It's a beautiful idea.
Great. Thanks.
Do you want to do your smicha song and dance?
Smicha stuff? It's not a song and dance. So for those of you probably know, but when a rabbi becomes a rabbi, there's a ceremony called smicha. And smicha is quite literally a rabbi who's actually a rabbi at that point, putting their hands on your head, your shoulders, you.
Your knees and toes.
What?
She's got head, shoulders.
Oh, knees and toes. Very good. You're just full of lovely camp songs today.
Head, shoulders, knees, and toes isn't a camp song.
Okay. And that action of putting hands on the person who's about to become a rabbi is called smicha. And they say words to you depending on your movement. It's done differently and by different people. At Ziegler, you choose who's going to give you smicha. So you choose someone who is going to put their hands, I think they put their hands on your, I don't actually remember that part, but they put their hands on you to say you are ready to be a rabbi, but you, the rabbinical student, chooses who that person is. And I remember very early on in my 5th year of rabbinical school, thinking about who I would want that person to be. And I was blessed to have a very long list of people who I wanted up on that bima with me. And it ended up coming down to who were the people that were kind of there from the beginning, that didn't just influence me throughout my rabbinical school studies, and who had great influence on me that I was going to, take with me for forever, but who really was the impetus for me to actually become a rabbi in the first place. And that's how I chose. That's not how everybody chooses, but that's how I chose. And ultimately I chose to have Rabbi Aaron Alexander and my dad be the people who presented me and gave me smicha. So I was particularly interested in this word to make a new leader, because for a rabbinical student, it's a moment of leadership for sure, but you don't necessarily think of it as a transitioning of leadership, right? My dad is not a rabbi, but he was able to give me smicha. Rabbi Aaron Alexander is a rabbi, but at that time was in a very different position than the one that I was about to be taking. So it's not the same kind of thing that's happening in our Torah where you're giving someone else the leadership that you have. It's just that you're giving them the qualities of leadership, hopefully that they're going to then put out into the world. So the pieces that I want to bring here, I won't do all of them just for sake of time. I'll let Rabbi Shapiro finish with whatever he was interested in. So this one is just a very quick one, but this is Ibn Ezra, and basically Ibn Ezra is talking about this. Is it? Hold on, I just want to say it correctly. Yeah, vesamachta, which is funny because if you don't look at it, it sounds like the word for to be happy. But vesamachta et yadecha, right? To put his hands on him. Ibn Ezra says to show Israel, to show the community that he was now going to be in Moses' place, that he was going to take over for Moses, and that he was the one that Moses had placed his hands on, right? That he was the one who was going to take on after him. So again, to go back to just the rabbinical school experience, right? That's not exactly what is happening, right? You're not taking over a role. You are just taking on a similar role to the person who's giving you that smicha. But interesting that in this particular leadership transition, that Ibn Ezra at least is understanding this as he was going to now take Moses' place, right? That by Moses putting his hands on him, that all of a sudden it's as if you're watching a movie, like Moses fades out of picture and Yahushua comes into the picture. That they actually switch places completely just in this one act of smicha. Ha'amektavar, wow, we're using very similar commentators today, which is very interesting. Translates this to say that so that he, Joshua, will have divine assistance to reach the truth and straight thinking. This is similar to smicha lehora'ah. So, it says here traditional authorization to judge cases. So being able to be close enough to something that you're able to teach from it or judge is how it's being translated here, which provides the benefit of divine assistance. For this reason, one who does not have smicha may not render judgment, even though he is qualified, because he does not have the divine assistance needed for this. So there's some kind of godliness to smicha, to being able to say, this is the person I am choosing in a very intimate moment of putting your hands on someone and saying, you are who I'm choosing, not just pointing across or saying a person's name, but really making sure that everybody knows this is the person who is ready for this moment. And Ha'amektavar goes as far to say, as that's also showing that God has approved of this moment, this decision. The last one I'll share is Rabbeinu Bachia. I think, hold on one second. Yeah, okay. And he says this was to demonstrate to all of the Israelites that he'll replace you, right? This is a moment where now the community was seeing sometimes it's harder to believe something until you see it, right? You need to see it to believe it. So the Israelites are now seeing that this is happening, and therefore they know Moses is leaving leadership and Yoshua is coming in. Our sages in Sifrei, which we've now quoted multiple times, understand this to mean that Moses was to provide Joshua with an interpreter who would announce all he had to say to the people, so that the people would not say later that Joshua would never have dared speak up while Moses was still alive. Not sure that part is so important or interesting, but that this was a moment where even though Moses was still alive, Moses was showing the people that this was the decision that he had made. Again, going back to what we had talked about before, it's not clear if this was really a decision Moses had made or if he was told that this was a decision he was making. But that smicha, that moment of physical acceptance, of physical touching, of really saying, like, you are the person who is going to take this on, also allows the people to believe that this is the next step in their journey. And I'll close with this and then let Rabbi Shapiro take over. But I think that to me is one of the most powerful parts of a smicha ceremony for rabbinical students, because it's not the moment of me saying, oh, I'm now taking over Rabbi Aaron Alexander's job. No, it's just that he has chosen me to be a person who can do in the world that which he has, been trying to do in the world as well as a rabbi. So that is a powerful moment that you find someone, you find those rabbis who will go to bat for you, who will say, I would place my hands on you in front of people to make sure that they know that you too are ready for this leadership and for this experience. So that moved me. It also is interesting that some of you heard me say this yesterday. It's interesting that 2 years ago, yesterday, I guess, I started at Beth Am, and that, part of that experience is saying to a community, we've chosen a person to be part of our leadership. And that goes a long way when you're being chosen, when that smicha is happening for you, that people then see that there is some kind of acceptance, some kind of excitement, some kind of interest in what the leadership will be with the next person, in this case with Moshe and Joshua. Rabbi Shapiro.
Renee has a comment.
Oh, Renee.
So it's in the smicha, both with Joshua and with what you were talking about in terms of being a rabbi. It's that these people that came before you are entrusting you with a sense of belief. They believe that you can now handle this responsibility that they're turning over to you. Right?
Yeah, and I think that there's also the sense of you've accomplished something, right? Like Yehoshua had accomplished something to reach that moment. Rabbinical students have accomplished, hopefully, a lot of schooling to get to that moment as well. So yeah, I think you're right. And there's that aspect of completion and celebration of that completion to be able to continue.
It kind of reminds me of the thing when we do the upsharing for the boys, and it's one of those rites of passage, I guess, where they've accomplished, they're now entering another stage of life, just like the rabbinical students have learned all that they needed to learn. Now the boy chicks are ready to take on the learning.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I think Judaism does a really beautiful job of those kinds of milestones in general. For anybody in any type of Judaism, that you would have these different aspects along your path, an upshare and a bar mitzvah, customs around a wedding, that point out those different stages of you've done something, you've gotten to this point, now you're going to get to a next point through this ritual. Rabbi Shapiro, would you like to share anything or teach anything?
I'm just thinking about, Renee, we also just had Rafi's upshearing. Sarah did a good job cutting his hair. We tied it up. It's still long, but not as long. I was looking at his hair this morning, actually. It's it used to be longer. I was just thinking how for so many of our rituals, there is an actual physical, tangible component. Is there for bar mitzvah? bat mitzvah? Like they're like a wedding, like there's like ketubah, there's ring, that like
The tallest,
there's
I
hair,
guess.
bris, obviously, right? Kfura, like, you know, almost so many of our rituals have that like tangible component, and smicha here too. It's like it actually
A tallest, right? For bar bat mitzvah?
Yeah.
Or Baruch Sheptarani. I mean,
Yeah, Baruch
that's not
Sheptarani
physical.
isn't.
It's not physical, but it's reading from the Torah.
I guess.
I mean, it's not cutting hair, right? Like it's not
Let's
that.
start doing B'nai Mitzvah haircuts. I'm gonna start doing B'nai Mitzvah haircuts in the
On Shabbat? You're gonna start cutting hair on Shabbat?
No, like
you just
pre-bar
told us?
mitzvah. We're gonna do on-site pre-bar bat mitzvah haircuts.
Okay.
It'll be a hit.
Can't wait.
It'll be great.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Schatz, was there anything else you wanted to talk about? I can talk about Hod for a little while, but I don't know if there's anything else you want.
No, you can. We're almost. I mean, I have other things, but we're almost at time. So you should feel free to share your pieces.
I am free to share my piece. I'll just quickly pull up because there's something in the phraseology of all of this that a lot of the pieces I saw specifically refer to, which is in verse 20 when it says "V'natata mehodecha alav," that you should give from your you should give from your hod upon him, that you should give him, and you can see it there translated as invest him with some of your authority. And hod, as we were saying, it can be translated as authority. It can be translated as glory or splendor. So I'll speak to that for a second, but I'll also just say that a lot of rabbis pick up on the fact that it says mehodecha and not hodecha, right? That you should give from your authority, from your splendor to him, basically indicating that you're not giving all of it, right? You're giving some of it, but not all of it, which there are a few different comments about. I'll get to that I'll just go into that. I mean, there's plenty to talk about in terms of why giving the authority so publicly that it's important for the people to see Joshua as a leader, which makes, kind of an intuitive sense. Rashi goes less in the authority because it, like Denise was pointing out earlier, this word holds a bunch of different meanings. Rashi really leans into the specific splendor piece, and he references back to a scene that folks know, right? That when Moses comes down from the mountain, getting tablets 2.0, that his face is glowing.
That's Parasha Ki Tisa. How do I know that? It was my bat mitzvah Parasha.
Great.
People should know.
Do you remember my bar mitzvah Parasha, Rabbi Schatz?
No.
Okay. Well, next year when we do this again, I'll make sure to point it out. That Rashi specifically cites that like Moshe is like transferring some of that glow, and the rabbis pick up on this verse as well. And in the Talmud, I think this is where Rashi gets it, where there's a lot of talk about how Moses' face was as bright as the sun, whereas Joshua's was like the face of the moon, right? So like still bright, but not as bright. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of commentary on like why is that the case, and how can it be, like, and again with that mehodecha, from your glory, that you're not giving so much that it's the full brightness, but it's still very bright. And so I'll just offer two very, very quick pieces on that. One of which is saying, this was from Rabbeinu Bachya, who talked about how, how the moon reflects the light of the sun, whereas the sun generates light, But then he makes the comment, don't forget that the sun also gets its light from God, right? So it's not Moses making this light in and of himself, that it actually comes from a higher source, which I think was interesting in terms of thinking about where glory comes from, where leadership comes from, where authority comes from, right? That there is ultimately a source that is greater than us, that transcends us. And like I said, a lot of folks talk about this Moses sun, Joshua moon kind of situation, which seems to be kind of shortchanging and diminishing Joshua a little bit, right? Like, well, Joshua, he's not the sun, he's only the moon. Apparently this is teaching from the Likutei Yehuda, which I learned is a collection of teaching from the rabbis of Gur, the Hasidic rabbis of Gur. So go, everyone, pick up your 5-volume set of Likutei Yehuda today. But there's a comment in there that talks about how each leader should be appropriate for each generation. So it's actually not having anything to do with Joshua. It's that Joshua, based on where that generation is at, is the right leader for that generation. Now, we can have a very long conversation about what a hard time the generation who left Egypt had. And you might think that, well, this is the generation that's going into the land, right? Are they really that much? But they're not maybe they're not the generation that was at Sinai, whatever it is. But it is interesting to think about, like, extrapolating out from there, that leader, and this gets back as well into the not intuitive but still interesting notion that Rashi had about this Asher Ruach Bo, referring to Joshua's ability to relate to each person as an individual, sort of here too, that Joshua is the way he is as a leader because that's the leader that he needs to be for the people in that time. And so I think there's a lot of interesting pieces there in terms about what leadership and authority are really about. So that struck me as interesting. Denise is going to make a poignant comment that will no doubt wrap everything up beautifully. Right, Denise?
Well, I don't know. It was sort of an impulse to raise my hand.
There you go. You and I, Denise.
So when he talks about just the right person for the moment, after President Biden was the winner, somebody was doing like a retrospect on all these interviews with him and stuff. And there was an interview in 2008 when he was running, or 7, whenever that was, when he ran a couple cycles ago. And they said, do you think this is your moment or whatever? They put all this pressure on him. And he had like no ego. He said, well, if I'm the right man for this time, that will become clear fairly quickly. And if it doesn't, then that's okay too. There was like no ego at all. It was all about, am I the right person right now or not? And then fast forward, he's very much the right person for this moment. And it just kind of ties into, I felt, to that idea of like, just that a leader has to have that too. That it's not, it's like from your hood, but not all of it, that there's like, do you know what I'm trying to say?
I think so. Yeah. The connection that they're the leader for the time, and that it's also connected to this idea about what's being invested in Joshua as he moves forward. Yeah. Yes. I'm assuming, I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're giving me a thumbs up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that just that somebody, that part of what makes a good leader is not having all that ego.
Right. It's not about the leader. It's about how the leader can serve the people, and if the leader is the right leader for that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't quite know how to wrap all this up. Does Rabbi Schatz?
I mean, I think that point brings us to all the different things we've spoken about today, that, the having a leader who can be someone who takes in that which the community needs so that they can lead better, but also recognizes that they've been chosen, right? That to use your example, Denise, right? Like when we vote for any president, no matter if they end up being right or not for that time, we, the people, have chosen them. So that there is some element of, even in a moment of smicha, right? You don't know that they might be right in that moment, but you don't know what they're going to do in the future. Or you might say they're not right in that moment and they might be great in the future. So I think you're right that all these different pieces that we've talked about the ruach and the smicha and the hod, right? They all come back to basically saying that if a leader is a person who can take in that which is around them and not make it just about them, but be able to make other leaders, be able to see other leadership in people who can come either after them or help them be the leaders that they are, that's really the way for all of us to see ourselves as leaders in whatever we're doing, big or small, to have every one of those aspects as part of it. So that's how I would lead. I would wrap it up. And Rabbi Shapiro is giving 2 thumbs up. So I guess that's it, folks.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.